Do you know of any expeditions to actually climb the mountain, or has anybody successfully summited it?
Has it been successfully climbed? No, not as far as I know. There have been rumours that a couple of Scandinavian mountaineers had a go at it, but it's quite unconfirmed. And the Chinese have been reluctant to allow anybody to go up. They know that it would cause trouble. It's considered sacred. Buddhists consider it sacred to Demchog, and the mountain itself should be inviolate. Hindus conceive it as the palace of Shiva, and there's an absolute ban on climbing it. There were a couple of attempts between the wars by British alpinists. One I think, he went with his Sherpa and attempted to. The Sherpa was called Satan, oddly enough, and they went up, and Satan said, "Of course you can go up, Saab," in the way Satans do, and up he went. I think he sort of described Mount Kailas rather superciliously as looking like a bowler hat. And anyway, he thought he was going to go up. They were driven back by an appalling mixture of snow and lightning, a sort of freak storm. And that stopped them in their tracks, and they went back again. About 10 years later, a Major Blakeney of the British Indian Army tried to go up with nothing more than a furled umbrella. But his Sherpa refused to accompany him too. So these were the only two attempts I've known. Reinhold Messner, the great Tyrolean climber, had an idea for doing it, but that too petered out. Either he or the Chinese authorities decided it was not to be.
Confirmation question. Am I right in thinking that the burial of the dead in this way is like Zoroastrianism? Laying out the dead. Isn't that what the Zoroastrians used to do?
Yes. The question was, is the Tibetan sky burial, does it relate to the Zoroastrian, at least? Is there a parallel? The Zoroastrian towers of silence of laying out the dead to be eaten. Yes, it's very much the same. Only I think the Tibetans are more anxious that nothing of the body remains. In the Zoroastrian, as you know, it's more random. They lay the body out. The bones survive for a long time, possibly. In the Tibetan system, this is jolly, isn't it? The bones get pounded up and they're made into sort of paste often, and they're first fed to the vultures because they are the least palatable, apparently. So the vultures go in and get them, and then the juicier bits come later. And the Tibetans usually, my experience was very odd of finding bones still left, but usually I think the sky burial masters are said to be masters of their craft and will dispense with the whole body. The sky burial masters, incidentally, are shunned in their community. It's very odd. They're both sort of respected for what they do, but in some way shunned, rather like blacksmiths are. And their daughters hardly ever marry. And if a sky burial master comes to your home and eats out of a plate, the plate will get thrown away. So it's not a profession that you imagine would excite anything but bitterness, but still, it's very old in Tibetan culture.
Yes, right down in front. Here.
I'm curious how, on particularly the longer trips, how do you actually write? Do you take notes and then take all the notes back home and then write, or do you write as you go along? No, I take notes. It's usually too disruptive. I mean, writing is very difficult, at least for me, and I need silence and a long stretch of time, and I've almost never written on the move. What I do is take lavish notes. I think there are two sorts of notes I notice writers taking, which are like two sorts of diary. One are notes that remind you of something that's happened, so they're quite brief. Others are very full notes, which almost take the place of what's happened. You're describing it so fully. Mine are the second kind, because I don't trust my memory, and I have to put everything down. And, so often I think a description
takes its life from something that is quite detailed. You know, it's the shape of somebody's eyebrows, or the particular expression they used, or the actual texture of rock. And all those things I have to write down on the journey. Otherwise, after a few months, you just forget. So that's how I work, and then I bring them back. The trouble with it is, of course, towards the end of your journey, you've got these notes, and you're terrified of them being confiscated, stolen, lost, which almost happened to me once in the Soviet Union, where I was sure the KGB were going to take them off me, which they just let me through with them. But it's a very, it's not comfortable. I don't know how else to travel and preserve memory. It makes it very self-conscious that as you're going along, you've just had a conversation with somebody, you find yourself writing it all down, or what a bit of scenery is like, that there it all is. And and sometimes several times a day I'll be doing this, but I've found no happier way to write. Once on the Soviet border, I was virtually sure they were going to be taken away. This was in the Brezhnev period. And I had these notes, and I'd been followed by the KGB for some weeks. And I knew I was going to be given a bad time at the border. Arrived at the Czech-Soviet border, which was a horrible place called Chop. And I was literally, my car, which I was in, was almost dismantled. The dashboard came out. I was stripped and body searched. My film was developed and so on. And they were just left with these notebooks, which they couldn't read because my writing's illegible, even to my friends. And there's this KGB officer there, like a big block of concrete, a classic sort of cliche KGB officer who I was hauled down to be interviewed by. And he had these notebooks, and he was thumbing through them, and he says, "Have you developed this writing specially?" I said, I said, "No, just my writing." And then it was like a sort of episode from a Gogol novel or something. He made me read out pieces. He couldn't read what I'd read out. I could say anything I wanted. But he noticed Odessa, you know, and he said that was a naval base, so he said, "Read me out about Odessa." So I read out how I left out all the conversations with dissidents and things, and said how the sun was sparkling on the waves in Odessa and birds were singing in the trees. After about half an hour, I said, "This is very poetic," he said. "You could publish this." And he handed back my notes to me. But of course, what I realized as I was reading out those notes, I realized that if he confiscated them, I couldn't have written a book, because all the detail that was in there, I wouldn't have ever remembered.
Firstly, isn't the answer to your notes problem taking notes on an iPad rather than anything else? But my question was, what's your view of the future of travel writing as the world becomes more homogeneous, your kind of writing, where you focus on exotic customs and exotic places? Is there a future for that kind of writing in 5-10 years' time?
Well, thank you. It's rather a different inflection to what Erica asked me, whether that sort of exotic travel writing can survive. And I don't know is the short answer. Of course, everything's more familiar to us. The distant is more familiar to us. I don't think that anything ever replaces, no viewing on a screen can replace the experience of being in a country. I mean, you can look at a place theoretically and read about it indeed, and imagine it, but nothing replaces the actual experience of being there and its transmission. As for the exotic, I suppose that is the future, probably, that the exotic will become domesticated and travel writing will change, which will make my sort of journeys rather dated in their way. So I think if the world continues as we suppose it may, that this sort of travel writing will pass into history as a phase of the genre. I can see that happening, but it may not. I mean, one's always predicting things that don't occur.
And also, I mean, dare I say that they are your books and the books of other travel writers too, but your books appear, some people have said, that they seem impersonal. You're not placing yourself in you're not describing yourself in the landscapes you're in, but it's your perceptions of those landscapes. It's your, and especially as you just described it now, and you said this immediate recreation, a kind of conversion into writing immediately. And surely that's always, I would have thought, that's what enables all writing to continue, is that we want to hear the writer's voice.
Yes. Yes, you hope so.
Yes.
Depending on the writer. Yes, I think in a way every generation has to retranslate the world for itself, not just because the world's changing, but because the priorities and the sensibilities of each generation of writers is changing too. So in a way, travel writing, I think, is one culture looking at another. And so it has, just as, you know, you have to retranslate the Odyssey or the Divine Comedy for each generation, so you have to retranslate the world. And so it doesn't ever become irrelevant, I think.
Who are your most admired travel writers? I mean, I was about to leap into a defense of the genre. It's not just because it's travel, it's great writing in your case, and others have survived. Boswell in the Hebrides, just to pick one example, on the sheer quality of the book. So my question is, who do you turn to in the dark hours when you can't sleep?
Well, my fiancée, I think. I think Robert Byron, this is a sort of classic for modern travel writers, I know, because he was, I don't like his attitude to people around him. It's extremely Victorian and supercilious, even though he was writing in the 30s. But there's a wonderful flexibility. I mean, he sort of can write about anything. You know, he can describe a ridiculous political conversation in Afghanistan, and or a menu or anything. There's that feeling of the richness of what comes through often apparently quite trivial things, and I love that. And combined as it is with some of the finest writing on architecture that we have in the language. So Robert Byron, The Road to Oxiana, is a great book, I think. The two that most influenced me were Patrick Leigh Fermor, for his robustness and delight in life and his knowledge, and Freya Stark for the poetic, absolutely individual, poetic character. Those are the three that spring to mind. There are others, but they'd keep me awake at night.
Yes, this lady.
Would you ever go on another spiritual journey?
I don't know. It doesn't. I don't think so. But one always says that and finds that a year later you've contradicted yourself. In one way, it sounds rather sort of pompous, but I sort of feel that all my journeys are a little bit spiritual, in as much as they're acts of discovery for myself as well as for the reader. I don't write, or I don't want to write, as if I know very much. There's always a sense of, I think, in my journeys to myself, of surprise, and it's not like, in other words, an academic treatise which is saying this culture or this country is like this. It's me, and this is one of the things travel writing can do, going along, being surprised, discovering something, being moved. And I think that's one of the great advantages of certain kinds of travel writing, that you can do that, so that in a way you're up for judgment along with your, just like anybody that you encounter on your journey, your figure in your own landscape, if you like. And I've always felt a certain, that the journeys are not, they're the journeys of somebody rather ignorant.